Profound divisions or defiant unity, now on open display in Tehran. Under the headline of a call for unity, former Iranian President Ali Akbar Rafsanjani has actually ensured that the divisions in Iran will continue and possibly increase. Is Rafsanjani playing his hand as a power broker, or is he fueling the opposition's fire to continue their movement under his leadership? Iran, the future of the Islamic Republic, and the power struggle at the top. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sahil Rahman. In a fiery Friday sermon, former Iranian president and current head of the powerful Assembly of Experts, Ali Akbar Rafsanjani, called for the release of citizens jailed after protesting at the result of the recent presidential election, expressing doubts about the election results. Rafsanjani placed himself in the middle between the reformists and conservatives, showing that after the elections, a degree of resentment had developed against the regime that cannot be ignored. Mohammed Shakir reports.
Tehran University's prayer hall has been the stage for high drama since the early days of the Islamic Revolution. And Rafsanjani's appearance on Friday was another of many electrifying moments in Iran's recent history. Rafsanjani returned to lead the prayers after nearly 8 weeks and addressed the Iranian people directly for the first time since the turmoil began. He said Iran was in crisis and many had doubts about the election results.
The situation that transpired following the election's results has created bitterness. I don't think there is anybody who wanted to see the situation end up like this. Now everybody has lost. We've all lost, but why? And today, more than ever, we need to be successful.
The sense of excitement was heightened because of the presence of Mir Hossein Mousavi, who claims to have beaten Mahmoud Ahmadinejad on June 12 and who rejects the election results and calls the vote illegitimate. Rafsanjani called for the restoration of trust by releasing hundreds of prisoners, freeing the media using only legal means, and by dialogue between the opposition and the regime. These were couched in the language of legitimacy and justice. Rafsanjani played a trump card by quoting his mentor, the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini, in ways that appear to support the opposition's right to demonstrate. Yet, he stopped short of calling for the annulment of the poll, a sign government supporters say of his political wisdom. His demands were in line with what reformists want, but he did not explicitly challenge the legitimacy of Ahmadinejad's government. It was an effort to play the role of a power broker, the role that some say Supreme Leader Khamenei should have played, but did not. 4 weeks ago, from the same platform, Mr. Khamenei called for an end to discussion about the election result, which he declared had been blessed by God. As he was speaking, the crowd outside burst into competing slogans of death to the dictator and death to opponents. No one could have had any doubts who they meant. Predictably, trouble erupted in the streets immediately afterwards. Outside, the government was illustrating that it deeply disagrees with him. Tear gas was used against opposition supporters outside Tehran University, and there was a number of arrests. Rafsanjani may have the interests of the Islamic Republic at heart, but his call for unity also shows that these wounds may take a long time to heal. Mohammed Shakir for Inside Story.
Well, joining me now are my guests in Tehran. Zagder Zibakalam, he's a professor of political science at the University of Tehran. In London, Paul O'Givney. He's a lecturer at the School of Oriental and African Studies and an analyst on Middle Eastern affairs. And also in London, Abbas Edelat. He's a professor at Imperial College London and founder of the Campaign Against Sanctions and Military Intervention in Iran. Welcome to Inside Story, gentlemen. Professor Zibakalam in Tehran, can I come to you first? I mean, is Rafsanjani right to say to the government that the public is still angry and that you need to address their concerns? I mean, he's not actually calling for regime change, is he?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. No, actually, he wasn't calling for a regime change. And let me emphasize that, nor for that matter, Mr. Mir Hossein Mousavi or ex-President Mr. Mohammad Khatami or Mr. Karoubi, no one is calling for a regime change. But everyone, that is to say, when I say everyone, of course, I mean the opposition, including Rafsanjani, they are calling for reforms, for a readjustment within the system. And in fact, they have the result of the election and what has been happening since the election has actually proven right the Rafsanjani's case, and for that matter the reformist case, that there are a vast number of Iranians who are critical of the present performance of the Islamic regime. They are critical of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. They are very much critical of the performance of Ahmadinejad. And for that matter, they could not accept the result of the June 12 election.
Abbas Edel, let me bring you in here. Why is it at the mere mention of the word reform, do those in the establishment and those in charge in Iran, it might seem, start to panic? Because there's been criticism from all areas hurtled towards Rafsanjani, especially from Ayatollah Zaddi. What should we read into this vocal onslaught, not just from clerics, but also from the state media as well?
Well, I think the source of the problem goes back to the ex-president Khatami, because when he was the president, although he promoted détente with the West and actually helped the overthrow of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, the Bush administration rewarded Mr. Khatami with the label of axis of evil, and actually threatened Iran with regime change after overthrowing the Saddam government. So the hardliners are quite suspicious of any changes within the system, any kind of reform which could somehow be reminiscent of what happened under President Khatami. Of course, this is unjustified because reforms and the extension of democratic rights for the people of Iran will actually consolidate the struggle of Iranian people against Western pressure. But this is the fear that the hardliners have, reminiscent of what happened some 8 years ago. And they are fearful of a velvet revolution. That's why they respond in a very fearful way.
Paul O'Givney, can I just bring you in here? You've heard both, well, two lines of thought there. What's your take on the actual current situation, this onslaught of verbal attacks on Ali Akbar Rafsanjani?
Well, I would see this as maybe a power struggle between the two different camps, between the reformist camp and the conservative hardline camp. Rafsanjani has been accused of everything. He's a pragmatist and he's a consummate politician. At the end of the day, he can shift gears very easily. Back in 2000, when he was running for the presidential race himself, he actually had his posters on the streets of Iran without his clerical robes. So he's almost like a political chameleon. Between he and Ayatollah, the Supreme Leader of Ayatollah Khamenei, there is, in a sense, an internal power struggle happening within the many branches of the different kinds of government, between the Expediency Council, the Supreme Guardian, and the Supreme Leader, the Office of the Supreme Leader.
Mr. Zabakalam in Tehran, can I just bring you in here as well? Ayatollah Mohammad Yazdi said to the Fars state news agency in the past few days, legitimacy and acceptance are different in Islamic governments. Votes alone do not create legitimacy. Is he contradicting himself? Because if votes don't create legitimacy, then why are these men telling Iranians to accept the result and the vote?
Ayatollah Yazdi, in fact, is not contradicting himself. But what he's doing, he is actually offering or making a different interpretation of the concept of Velayat Faqih, the jurisprudence of the Supreme Leader. Now, Mr. Rafsanjani on the Friday prayer, he actually emphasized the fact that the whole legitimacy of the Islamic government in Iran relies on the support of the people. And he quoted the late Imam Khomeini as the evidence that he actually has emphasized that the support of the people is of paramount for the Islamic regime's legitimacy. Now, what Ayatollah Yazdi is saying to or replying to Mr. Rafsanjani is that no, sir, that is not the case. And with or without the support of the people, with or without the backing of the people, the supreme leader, that is to say Ayatollah Khamenei, and whoever else that is in his position, has the legitimacy from the heart of the religion. In other words, Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader in Iran, he doesn't necessarily have to have backing of the people.
But of course, the supreme leader, if I bring Abbas Edelat into this, the supreme leader could be said, but from outside observers, to have misjudged the situation. Should he have accepted those results so quickly and supported the incumbent President Ahmadinejad? Has the thought of this velvet revolution undermined the authority of the supreme leader in any way by possibly needing to take the people with him rather than alienating them, as some would observe?
Well, as I said previously, the Islamic Republic, or the ruling class within the Islamic Republic, is in fear of a velvet revolution in Iran. And it is true that Ayatollah Khamenei and, for that matter, even the Interior Ministry, they should have waited for 3 days for all the complaints to be addressed by the Guardian Council before actually announcing and asserting who was the winner in the election. So that was not really according to the constitution what had happened. But as I said, it's the fear of this velvet revolution, it's the fear of the Western meddling in Iran, and the Western media also, by the way it portrayed the events in Iran as some sort of velvet revolution, in fact accentuated this fear among the leaders of the Islamic Republic as far as the Ayatollah Khamenei and Ahmadinejad faction is concerned.
Well, let's just allow our viewers to bring them up to speed as to what has been happening in Iran if you're watching us here on Inside Story. It's been relatively quiet in Iran since the original protests after the presidential election results were announced over a month ago. On June the 13th, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was declared the winner. Protests began within hours. The following day, defeated opposition leader Mir Hossein Mousavi asked for the results to be annulled. Well, 2 days later, foreign media were banned from leaving their offices, preventing them from covering the continuing protests that were happening across the country. By the end of the week, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei issued a declaration stating that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad had won the election fairly. And as world leaders reacted to the situation in Iran, President Ahmadinejad accused the West of interfering in Iranian affairs. Protests have continued sporadically each time, forcefully put down, leading to Rafsanjani's comments on Friday. Paul O'Givney, can I just bring you in here? Do you think there's a siege mentality at the top of the Iranian regime at the moment, trying to work out how to deal not just with the public, but also with Rafsanjani?
I think you could be correct on this point, but it's also a typically Iranian mentality. It goes back to the days of the many conquests of Persia, by former Persia and Iran, with the Russians and the British, especially the British. There's called Uncle Napoleon syndrome is what it's actually called. There was a book written in the 1940s and 1950s called Uncle Napoleon, which blamed everyone as a comedy. Everything seemed to be at the foot of the British, at the behest of the British. This is the Iranian mentality. And if you understand that, you can understand the siege mentality that they have. I mean, this is not the first time this happened. It's not the last time it will happen. This is deep in the Iranian psyche, so to speak.
And of course, there has been foreign interference in Iranian affairs for many years, even before the revolution. Dr. Ziba Kalam, can I come back to you in Tehran? Is it fair to say that though Iranians in the country are behind the revolution of 1979, they aspire for development and reform. Yet the mere accusation of foreign plots during an election campaign are an insult to their own intelligence and their own aspirations, and that's what they're angry about as well.
Yes, it is indeed. Let me before actually responding to your question, let me say that the difficulty is not whether or not we should accept the election result as the government says, or we should dismiss it as the opposition said. The problem is that the more educated Iranian, the more professional Iranian, university graduate, lawyers, physician, university lecturers, writers, they are all against the result of the election. So whether or not in reality Ahmadinejad has actually managed to have 24 million votes as he and the government claims, the fact remains that the vast majority of educated Iranian are actually against Ahmadinejad and his policies. Now, to attribute their anger and their opposition to the election result as to a kind of conspiracy by United States, by Zionism, by Britain, as a kind of velvet revolution, is like a slapping Iranian in the face. I mean, it's adding insult to injury, because they have queued for many hours in front of the polling stations. They have rallied time and again for Mr. Mousavi in the streets of Tehran. Now, after all these, to be told that actually it was a plot by the United States, it was a velvet revolution, and we the revolutionaries we try to suppress it, is causing actually a lot of Iranian to even more resent Ahmadinejad and his government.
Abbas Edelat, would you agree with that assumption coming from Tehran?
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, whatever the foreign meddling in the affairs in Iran before and after the election, whatever the truth about that, there is absolutely no doubt that the massive movement of protest was a genuine grassroots movement, and it was actually against all the kinds of limitations in democratic rights, freedom of press, mismanagement of the economy, and various other issues that the educated classes, the middle classes, have had for some 4 years now. It was the first time this could find an outlet. So I completely agree. But there is one point to make here, you see. I think the reformist movement, the reformist leaders, are not doing themselves much service by refusing, or by their failure to separate themselves from people in the West who speak in the name of the Green Movement, who speak in the name of the reformist movement. But what they say is hardly distinguishable from what the new conservatives say. For example, they say that Iran is trying to develop nuclear weapons, that Iran is supporting terrorism abroad. And these things, in the name of the Mousavi movement, in the name of the Green Movement, is asserted by people in the West, by the so-called supporters of the Green Movement. And I think the reformist leaders in Iran have to move rapidly to strongly separate themselves from these, I would say, very opportunistic elements who actually are clouding the water, and this is very dangerous for the reformist movement. So I think the reformist movement, having achieved this major victory, has got a huge responsibility to separate itself from those who want the overthrow of the Islamic Republic and who say the same sort of things that the new conservatives say.
But let's just hold that thought for a moment, because we're going to talk about how Iran moves on. But let's talk about the man at the centre of all of this, Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani. Now, he's been an important figure in Iranian politics for nearly 3 decades now. Rafsanjani was Iranian president from 89 to 97. He's considered to have a close relationship with Ayatollah Khomeini. He studied theology alongside the supreme leader. And much later in the 1980s, Khomeini appointed Rafsanjani acting commander-in-chief of Iranian forces at the end of the war with Iraq. Now, he suggested developing relations with the West and has dealt with the United Nations to secure the end of several regional conflicts. In the run-up to June's elections, he was a strong backer of reformist Mir Hussein Mousavi. Rafsanjani holds two extremely influential positions in politics. He's head of the Expediency Council, which covers disputes over legislation, as well as the Assembly of Experts that has strong influence over the selection of Iran's supreme leader. Paul McGivney, let me come to you just on how Rafsanjani moves here now into the future. We've analysed really the post-election chaos and the war of words. But how does Rafsanjani now have to move? Because one might say that he's making perhaps more enemies rather than he is friends.
Well, that would be debatable, I would say. I mean, because Rafsanjani, like I said, he is a political chameleon. He's got his own power base, essentially, in the Expediency Council and the Council of Guardians. You have to remember as well that he was the one who installed Khomeini after Khomeini died. So he's an important figure, and he's not going to lie down very easily. He's going to be around for some considerable time. He's 75 years old now. He's been involved in revolutionary politics for 60 years, since he was 15. Now this man is a career politician. He is not going to lie down that easily, believe me. He's going to be around for much longer.
Dr. Zibakalam in Tehran, then let me bring you in here. Do you think there is going to be some sort of backroom deal between the so-called reformists and those that are actually in charge of Iran at the moment? Because if it's not solved in some way, are we still going to keep seeing these demonstrations? You want to see these demonstrations go away? There's got to be some sort of deal, surely.
Well, I think eventually there must be a compromise between hardliners on the one hand, who are holding the power, and the opposition, and maybe Rafsanjani has enough experience and credibility to actually be able to bring about a compromise between the two camps, because more and more Mr. Mousavi and his supporters are demonstrating to Ahmadinejad and the government that they simply would not disappear, they simply would not go away, and to harass them, to detain some of them, even to kill half a dozen or a dozen of them, would not make them to deter, would not make them to actually disappear. So I think gradually the government has to accommodate for the opposition, and that's exactly what Rafsanjani is trying to do, because he's worried that the bitterness, that the struggle between the reformists and the hardliners would actually put in jeopardy the whole Islamic Republic, would put in jeopardy the whole Islamic Revolution. And as a staunch supporter of the Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Republic, obviously Rafsanjani is extremely anxious to bring about some sort of peace, some sort of rapprochement, some sort of accommodation between the two sides.
Well, we shall see what does happen over the coming weeks, months, or perhaps even years. Thank you for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. I'd like to thank my guests in Tehran, Dr. Sadeh Zibakalam, in London, Paul McGivney and Abbas Edilat. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. We do welcome your comments and suggestions for future programmes. Do email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Sahil Rahman. You've been watching Inside Story. Thanks for your time and your company.